Hey, welcome to today's Spirecast, and glad you're joining us. If you just want to drop in the chat where you're coming from, I would love to have you jump in there. One of the things that I love about what we're doing with this is we just want to bring practical help for church leaders. All of my years in ministry at LifeBridge, I was just a practitioner and was always looking for what is that thing that somebody's doing that's working, or give me an idea to work from. And one of the things I do know about things like our Spirecast is the practical side of it. It isn't just who's showing up now, but actually how many shares it gets afterwards. And we've been really blessed that almost every week there's another 500 to 1,000 people who've been leaning in. And I think the reason for that is it's just simple, practical ways for us to be looking at challenges. I just came out of a couple days in Nashville with our Spire board and the team planning the conference for September 14th through 16th, and really excited. I'm looking forward to it. What we want to do at the conference is really address the issues around what helps a leader, the leader's team, the leader's heart, the leader's church. And it's been the very first one was a great team event. Of course, we were digital last year. We're hoping there's this pent up energy for us to gather again. Registrations are coming really strong for it. So really looking forward to seeing you in Nashville. Go to spire.network for that. And I would love to have you plug in and be a part. Today we've got the privilege of having a friend of mine, Brian Hunt. I've loved Brian and watching his ministry and what he's been doing. And one of those young leaders who just is always engaging into the future. And so, Brian, glad you're jumping on. Brian's a lead pastor at Crossroads Grace Church in Manteca, California, and love his team there and what he's done. And we're going to be talking today about how do we build a team in a difficult environment. We're going to watch Jordan Rice's talk. Jordan's the lead pastor at Renaissance Church in Harlem. I've had the privilege of being there a couple of times, watching what he's doing. He's built this phenomenal multi-ethnic church in one of the more difficult places on the planet to do ministry, right in the heart of New York City. And so watch this talk with Jordan. Drop your questions into the comments if you can. And Brian and I'll be back after his video and just talking about what does it mean to work with a team, particularly when there's some challenges. And we have certainly had some challenges this year, haven't we? So let's watch Jordan here. Thanks, Brian, for jumping in today.
It's been a challenging season for all of us, but we're thrilled to welcome Jordan Rice to talk about building teams in this new reality. Jordan is a native New Yorker and the lead pastor of Renaissance Church in Harlem, which he planted after leaving a successful career in law. Jordan is also the New York City Regional Director for the Orchard Group, a 70-year-old church planting group that believes in starting new churches to reach new generations with the Christian gospel.
What's going on, everyone? My name is Jordan Rice. I am a church planter in Harlem at Renaissance Christian Church, and I'm also a member of Orchard Group's team. I work with New York City church planting and some other things, and I'm so grateful to be with you all. And man, we live in just really difficult times. And one of the challenges of living in these difficult moments, be it this global pandemic, which has forced us to be online, or all of the division in our country, the heightened awareness around racism that's happening and injustices, and just all of the personal and national stress that's going on. It is certainly a really tumultuous time, but the mission of God continues. Whenever we were given and tasked with the Great Commission, Jesus did not give us a clause out. He didn't say, go and make disciples unless stuff gets difficult. He anticipated difficulty in that. And I'm so grateful to be with you today to talk about how do we build teams that will continue with the mission that God has given us for the church in these really difficult and trying times. Now, the first thing that I found personally and in my own team and with my own staff is something that is really hard for me to do, and it's called grieving. One of the challenges that robs us from the ability to move forward is not first appropriately stopping to grieve where we are. So grieving is made up of a number of things. Grieving first means that you stop and you notice all of the things that really are just sad in our day, in our time. One of the things that I found very personal is that there's so many things that are happening right now. So there's 200,000 Americans who have passed away from the coronavirus. There's loss of life. There's loss of rhythms. There's loss of connectivity. There's so many different losses that we are experiencing. And it's sad. These are the things that we should pay attention to and notice. And it does us no good to pretend as if these things don't exist. Jesus promises us, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So we have to grieve. And one of the biggest reasons that we have to grieve is so that we would be able to empty ourselves of everything. One, it's because it's biblical. And two, so that we can empty ourselves and prepare ourselves to envision a new reality. So one of the things that I found to be very true for me is that I cannot envision the new reality that God is calling me to until I have first grieved the present. So what does this look like? It looks like spending time writing down, for example, all of the things that I wanted to do and I can't do. This past week, our church, Renaissance Church, turned 6 years old, and we are so grateful for God's faithfulness to us and so many amazing things that are happening in New York City, so many things that are happening in our church that would give cause for celebration. But there's also some stuff that's just hard. And this past week, I was talking to some friends and my wife about just the nature of where we are as a city, as a country. And it was just sad. And I had to grieve the fact that I couldn't come together with our church and hug everybody and be indoors and celebrate a service together. And it's really helpful to make sure that we are spending time paying attention to the difficult emotions that are arising inside of us that would free us to be able to imagine and envision a new future. So the first really important thing to do is to make sure that we are grieving. How do I do this? I'll spend time and I'll set a timer, for example, for 10 minutes. I set a timer for 10 minutes for two reasons. One, I don't want to just drown in sadness. So I don't want to go on indefinitely and just be so miserable that I forget, I lose all hope for humanity and for my church and for our team. So I set a timer for 10 minutes and I say to myself, for 10 minutes, I'm going to feel the weight of all of the negative emotions associated with what's going on in the moment. Now I also do 10 minutes. That's just my number because I don't want to shortchange it. Now here's the life hack. There is a logical Jordan and there is an emotional Jordan. And for those 10 minutes, I don't let logical Jordan into the room. He is not allowed to enter. The only person that's allowed to be there is the emotional Jordan. And emotional Jordan is going to feel the weight of all of the things that are happening in the moment so that he can properly grieve them. And I think a really healthy team spends time both individually and collectively grieving the present, making sure that they are paying attention to all of the things that are sad and would cause them to grieve. Now, we did this with our team, and it's a pretty painful exercise to think about all the things that you love to do that you can't do right now in the moment, but it is a really valuable thing to do. So the first thing I would really encourage people to do as they're thinking about building their teams in really difficult environments is to make sure that they are noticing, lamenting the things that they want to bring to God, and then they are turning these things over to God in dependent trust at the end, saying, God, I don't understand everything, but you do. And before we get to rushing to God's sovereignty, we're spending time dealing with our emotions honestly, but eventually turning them over to God in dependent trust. The second thing to do, once you have grieved all of the things that's happening that make your environment difficult, is to imagine. One of the things that I think Christians have lost is just our curiosity. One of the things that I've been challenged to do is just to have a curiosity as to what God is up to in all of the things that are going on in our life, in our church, in our world, because God has never left us. As a matter of fact, Jesus has promised that he would never leave us or never forsake us. I think back to the story where Jesus' disciples were in the boat, and it says that Jesus was in the bottom of the boat sleeping. And that lets us know a couple of things. Number one, everybody loves a good nap, even the Lord Almighty. So Jesus is asleep in a boat, and the disciples are facing this storm, and they see all of the wind and the waves, and they are terrified of what's going on. They rush downstairs in the boat, and they say, Jesus, don't you care if we drown? Jesus says, oh, you a little faith, and he calmed the storm, and they were even more terrified after he calmed the storm, that even the wind and the waves obey him. I've found myself in moments like that where I have lost my curiosity of what God is doing, and I jump into accusation mode that God is distant or that God doesn't care. And I think that God wants us to have an imagination, and he wants our teams to have an imagination of what God is up to in this time. Like it says in Ephesians 3:20, that our minds could not even begin to think about all of the things that God has prepared for us and all of the things that are possible for us through the power that works inside of us. God is up to something, and we need to spend time as teams reviving ourselves with this curious posture as to what God is up to. And one of the things that will keep us on mission is being curious about what God is up to. And the third thing that we need to do is we need to build a culture of celebration. And full disclosure, I am the worst person on the planet to celebrate. It's really difficult for me to celebrate. I have to force myself to do it. I never feel like I've done enough that's even worthy of celebrating. But every time we do it as a team and we come together and we celebrate God's faithfulness to us, it just revives us. It just gives us more energy to continue to move forward. And that's a biblical thing. In Joshua 4, God tells the children of Israel to pick up stones as stones of remembrance. Now, these stones would serve as a reminder of God's faithfulness to them. And in order for us to have the energy to continue to move forward in difficult environments, we need to make sure that we are reviewing the stones that God has of God's faithfulness to us, spending time telling the stories and retelling the stories of God's faithfulness to us, to revisit these things so that we would have the energy to continue to go forward and moving forward and navigating the difficult times, reliving the times that God has been with us as a statement, as a promise of his presence, his provision, and his guidance going forward. So number one, in a difficult environment, you have to spend time grieving your losses, grieving all things that are difficult, paying attention to those negative emotions. Number two, you have to imagine with a curious mind, what is God up to in these moments? And number three, we have to celebrate. And for some of you, it's going to be hard for you like it is for me. Spend time celebrating what God has done in the past as a team together, telling the stories of all the things that God has done. It will give you energy to continue to move forward.
Hey, Brian, I loved Jordan's real kind of simple approach right there. Right? Grieve the stuff that we ought to grieve and imagine a better future, lean in the future, and then celebrate. You know, you've helped lead some transition stuff, even where you are right now. Yeah. And I know you've had to manage those three pieces. Just give me some stuff around that.
Yeah, well, it's one of those interesting things. So I took over for a church that had a founding pastor 30 years. And so there was this tension of, hey, we want to celebrate as Pastor Mike, who just is an amazing man of God, like just unreal, celebrate all that he had done, but also get excited about what's to come. And so there's like a grieving because he was leaving, celebrating because I was coming. And there was just like this emotional just goo that was there. But what I loved about it is that God was just good through it all. And for us, for transition, it was an interesting time because I inherited a staff that had kind of downshifted because there was like a long runway into the transition. And so they were kind of ready to go. They were sad Pastor Mike was leaving, but there's also this anticipation of what could come. And so through a hard thing, some really great things happened out of it. And I think that's a real COVID even message that we could talk about, is that as we've come out of COVID, even though it was super hard and a lot of really rough stuff came through it, I think we can all look back and say, there were some pretty good things that came out of it. I think the church needed the wake-up call. I think there was a transition that needed to be made there. And we have a chance to do that. And the churches that decide, we're just going to go back to what we were doing before, I think they're missing out on the growth that could potentially happen from that, because the normal isn't normal anymore. And we've got some new things that we get to do. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah. A disruption can be a powerful moment. I think sometimes we catch ourselves. And I think it's appropriate to grieve. In fact, the very first day at this year's Spire conference, we're gonna have that first opportunity to lament, to grieve, to like, wow. I mean, it's been on leaders. It has been a difficult time, right? No doubt. But also to lean in is part of that, right? To move toward the future, and disruption allows it. What do you see coming in your space, right? Where you are, both from a local side, and I know you kind of connect around in a lot of other leadership circles, for the church. What will this disruption actually help us do?
Well, it's gonna force us to really nail down, what do we really want our digital platforms to look like? What do we really want that to be? Because as we're doing this right now, I'm in California, you're in Florida, and there's people from all over the country. I see people from Escalon, and
nobody knows I'm in Florida. I'm supposed to be in Colorado right now. So thanks.
Oh, got it. Yeah. So I mean, you could put a background on anything, but anyway, yeah. But the reality is that we can do so much more digitally, and so are we leveraging that for the gospel? Are we really kind of figuring that out? So before, people just used to put a camera up, and this is our experience, and if you like it, you like it. It's kind of our window into our service. But now we're saying, hey, how do we disciple people? How do we take people to the next level, both in their walk with Jesus and giving, and with growth groups and community? And you could fight that and say, nope, we're going to shut down all of our cameras. If you want to see church, you got to come to our space. And you could do that, but you could also be Blockbuster, and you could close your doors. And so we have to make a decision of what we want our churches to be, and how do we leverage the future, and not look at it as this bad thing, but say, hey, how do we leverage this for the gospel? I think that's what Paul would do. I certainly know that's what Jesus would do. He'd use examples all the time in modern day to be able to get his point across. And so I think that's one big thing. But then the second thing I would say from a leadership perspective is we're going to have to learn to lead people differently, because now we've discovered that people can do their jobs, a lot of it remotely, that there's a different rhythm that they have at their homes. Because I just dropped my kids off a little bit ago. I got a 3-hour window until I got to pick them back up. And so to go into the office and come back is just not realistic. And so I think a lot of those things are going to cause us to lead differently. And one thing that I really came to grips with during the difficult season was, when you're leading people that have a work life, a home life, but then also kind of this personal life that was all of it was kind of thrown in the blender. And as a leader of a church, or a leader of an organization, you instantly want to go to, hey, but how's that affecting my bottom line, my church attendance, things like that. But if you don't factor in the family and the things that are happening at home, you'll never get the type of production or the type of leader that you want out of that if you don't recognize that. So I think those are big things.
Yeah, I agree. And give me some thoughts around how you're helping your team through this. Because if we're talking about a difficult environment, I've been saying, I think, Brian, you've heard me say on a couple of other things we've done together, where sustained stress and extended ambiguity is where we are right now. And that's difficult, especially it's a cocktail for burnout. How are you helping your team in this space?
Yeah, well, one of my pastor friends actually sent out in a cohort. He said, I am getting exhausted of trying to rally the troops, right? I'm getting exhausted trying to figure out another way to say hard things are going to be okay, and and to make my face do something that my heart's not feeling, and so I think that's a real key to kind of think about. But for me, what I've tried to realize is I've tried to I kind of adopt this idea of like authentic confidence. Like, I'm going to be authentic about how it's making me feel, but I'm going to be confident about where we're going, because I believe in a big God that does big things. And I think the leaders that miss it are the ones that try to put on this bravado, and they just say, we got it figured out, it's going to be okay. Hey, in reality, let's just be honest that there's some hard things that are going on. And if you can resonate with people with that and say, hey, I'm going through the similar things that you're going through, that all of a sudden, I think your leadership level raises, and your team is like, I can be behind that guy, I can be behind that girl, because they get it, and they're not trying to be in an ivory tower somewhere. I think ivory towers have got to be crushed, and we've got to start to get on level ground like Jesus did. Yeah,
I would agree. And I think one of the things that I find, I loved Jordan's line about, the logical Jordan and the emotional Jordan, right? And as leaders, we get those. So give me a time where you have led from logic, or you've led from emotion with your team, and the fallout from that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said fallout, because it certainly usually goes that way. But I think an example of that is probably when we were trying to figure out, like, do we reopen the church? Do we not reopen the church? In California, we've got we've got an interesting governor that likes to do interesting things, let's just say. And so there are times where when he kind of flexes, that it kind of makes everybody kind of reel a little bit. And so when it came time for the second shutdown that he did in California, we really had to kind of look in the mirror and say, hey, what do we do? How do we go about this? And is this the time for us to follow, or do we need to really engage in something different and be a leader? And so we, through prayer and a lot of fasting, a lot of I really feel like it was time for us to open. And there's a biblical noncompliance that's called, I believe, is called God-centered ethical noncompliance, where you're not obeying the authority for the betterment of people. And there are people that are dying all around us and committing suicide. And so they need the hope of Jesus. And so we just said, we're going to open. We're going to do that. Now, I would say that it was difficult because we had some staff members that were like, I don't know about that. So it was a lot of sit down conversations and walking through the Bible with them, and, tension, and even people in the church that didn't agree with it. And so you have to make these difficult decisions. But what I loved is the fallout was actually a good thing, that people rallied behind it. And they said, man, I agree. And that you've got it rooted in Scripture is really important. But my initial reaction was like, I don't care who says, let's just open the doors. Like, I don't care. And you have to temper that with all the different people that are out there. You got people that are scared to death. You got people that could care less, and you got people that are kind of somewhere in between. And so having to lead through that, it was really hard. But I think that opening our doors at that time was a difficult decision that you had to weigh out. But at the end of the day, I think it was the right one.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned the mental health fallout from this, and I think it's real. And I think it's one of the challenges, and it's interesting. It's the mental health of people in our city. It's the mental health of people in our congregations, right? The people we're caring for. And it's also the mental health of those who are leading, volunteers and staff who are leaning in. And I think we're in this season where there's a phenomenal opportunity for the church, but again, not without significant challenge. Like, how are we doing this? As you think about, as we regather, right? And it depends on where you are in the country. Where I was yesterday in Lebanon, Missouri, they were shut down for like about 12 hours, I think, back in March, a year ago, March. And now, but I'm in Colorado, where we just opened back up late fall, and you guys are getting that mixed messaging going on all the time. And so I love your boldness in how you're leading. But what do you see as part of the engagement pathway? Because I think that's a challenge that our teams are all going to face. And as we think about difficult environments, that's a new one. We no longer can we be so weekend centric, right?
Yeah. I mean, the engagement pathway, if that's terminology you're familiar with, like, how do you engage somebody that's coming through your doors or through your screens or through I think that what I'm learning is that if you get somebody on campus, let's say, that has come from a digital experience, you have to nail it. Like, the window of grace is smaller now that I've seen, because I think people realize that there's just so many more opportunities. So, I could church shop 20 churches in the matter of one day. And if for some reason they choose your church, boy, you gotta nail it. And so, like, the excellence bar, I think, is even raised a little bit more for that in person. But when you're trying to engage people online, I think what you have to understand is that an online audience is probably looking for something potentially different than an in-person audience. And so are you engaging them with what they want? And the churches that say, we're just going to do our thing and we're going to do, you could do that. You certainly can. But I think you're missing out on an opportunity to say digital it's its own little animal. And so we have to engage them differently. We have to create different ways for them to experience generosity differently. You just have to be creative. So one way that we've done that is through something called the $5 challenge. $5 challenge is just something where we say, hey, give $5 on the weekend, and we're not going to tell you what we're going to do with it, but we're going to give it all away. And it's been an awesome thing. In the past, we've paid for groceries at a low resourced community. We've bought a single mom a car that was disabled. We paid for cancer treatments for a young lady that was in debt, and we got her a guitar, like really cool things. But what it was is it gives people the taste of generosity to be able to be part of something bigger, and hopefully that sparks something in their life. But this last time we had it, and we had it virtually all online. We said, hey, we want to raise this amount of money to be able to just impact somebody, and the goal was a pretty hefty amount. And we actually hit that number and exceeded it. And we had so many people giving online because we really weren't in person. So what was cool to see is that people giving $5 from Des Moines or from Maryland and being a part of something bigger than themselves. And so we were able to do about several churches have done it to be able to pay off medical debt. And we paid off about $2.4 million in medical debt by just people being generous. And so I think that's a small way you can gauge people into generosity and then take that next step with them.
Yeah. And I love the creativity with that. And, and we're in a great season to get to experiment with some stuff and, try and fail. Next week, a podcast, we have Carey Newhoff on, and Carey's going to share his talk from Spire in the fall, but also then talk of what the trends are going on. And, he's speaking right exactly down, what you've just talked about, Brian. So we just got a minute. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Well, I'm glad I get to lead off for Carey Newhoff and really set the table for him. So, Carey, if you're watching, there you go, bud. What I would just say is leaders, we need you more than ever. Like it's more than ever do we need leaders that are willing to adapt and to be nimble, but also be authentic on how they're going through things. Don't be Superman, don't be Superwoman. Get people around you that you can interact with, Spire networks, people that you can connect with. Because if you try to do it on your own, you're going to get exhausted. And at the end of the day, people don't want a pile of goo on the ground. They want you, and they want to see you leading, and they want you leading well. And we're going to be able to get through this, but we're going to get through it together. So grateful for Spire, for all that you guys are doing, and just for people out there to know that there's help and there's ways to get through difficult environments with each other.
Hey, Brian, thanks for jumping in. Just again, love you as a leader, love you as a person, and grateful for you. And if you want to catch Jordan's talk again, obviously this will be available on the Spire.network, as were all the Spire conference and podcasts we've been doing, Spirecast we've been doing. So love to have you pick those up here. Don't forget Ephesians 2:10, you're God's workmanship, created in Christ to do the good things he's already planned in advance for you. So thanks for leading. God bless. See you next week.